Cardiovascular system. We're going to talk first about blood clots, and then we'll talk about blood typing. Okay, so blood clotting. So, why clot blood? Why is it important? Blood clotting is important to prevent blood loss upon injury. That injury could be something internal, which you might not see, or something external. But the goal is we want to stop the loss of blood in a timely fashion so we don't lose an excessive amount of blood with injury. Okay, so we want to clot blood. How do we do it? All right. Step 1, injure yourself. Step 2, okay. Within about a minute, we'll mobilize platelets to the site to form the platelet plug. Think of that like a temporary bandage over your injured area until such time as a proper blood clot can form, okay? So now we're going to go through a process of blood clotting. Blood clotting is a fairly complicated process that involves many, many different protein factors. And the factors are named by Roman numerals. So for example, factor 10, factor 9, this is why we still have to learn Roman numerals in school if you ever want to go into medicine. So each of the different protein factors has a different Roman numeral, and it's almost like a relay race. One kind of passes the baton to another until such time as a proper blood clot can form. So there's a series of several steps. The final step is the conversion of something called fibrinogen into a protein called fibrin. Fibrinogen is a protein that's in your plasma that is inactive, meaning it's not going to actively form a clot. One of the last steps in our blood clotting process is to convert this inactive protein to something active. This fibrin is what actually forms the clot. And obviously you couldn't have this floating around in your plasma because then your blood would be clotting all over the place inappropriately. Okay? So let me talk about some issues associated with blood clotting. First one's hemophilia. When someone has hemophilia, their blood doesn't clot. There are different types of hemophilia. I'm just going to talk very general about hemophilia. Your blood is not clotting. Why is that happening? You're missing one of those factors. One of the more common issues is missing what's called factor 9. And it's called a factor 9 deficiency that can lead to hemophilia. So, if someone has hemophilia, obviously, if your blood is not clotting, they are at a very, very high risk for bleeding out. To get around this, when someone's diagnosed, you have to give back, you can give the clotting factor. So you're going to give back the protein that this individual is missing so that they can complete the clotting process. This can be given via injection. And obviously the person would be advised not to participate in hockey, perhaps. Okay, that's hemophilia. This is a genetic disorder and is what's called sex-linked, meaning the faulty gene is on the sex chromosomes, not the autosomes or the non-sex chromosomes. Okay? All right, second issue associated with blood clotting is when someone develops a DVT. Okay, so let's break down what does DVT stand for and what the issue is. DVT, the D is for deep, the V is for vein, the T is thrombosis. Okay, when someone has thrombosis, it means they have a clot. It's a DV because it's in a deep vein. Remember, veins are deep to the skin and arteries are more superficial. Okay, you can develop an arterial clot, but venous clots are far more common. When someone has a DVT, more often than not, they're in the legs and the lower extremities, but you can have them in your arm. I personally had a DVT in my subclavian vein on the left side. So you can have them in the arm, but they're not as common. They're certainly more common in the legs. So what happens? We get a clot in a vein, and this will impede blood flow back to the heart. So if our clot is here, your arm, for example, would turn bluish because you're backing up deoxygenated blood. It's going to become cold to the touch and will probably become swollen. Okay, so you would have some swelling, maybe a bluish tint to the skin. Skin would look cyanotic, and maybe change in temp. That the area might be cool to the touch. How is this officially diagnosed? They do an ultrasound of the affected area to locate the clot. If it's established that someone has a blood clot, they treat them in the following manner. Okay, so we want to treat it. Why do we have to treat it? It's dangerous. So if you have a thrombosis, let's say you have a DVT in your leg, okay, a piece of that clot could fractionate. When it does, then it's classified as an embolus. The danger would be that you would have an embolus that potentially could go into the lungs, to the coronary arteries, which could trigger, then of course you're impeding blood flow to the myocardium of the heart, or perhaps could be in the brain and maybe an opportunity for that individual then to have a stroke. So we want to treat blood clots. We want to be very careful with blood clots. So, treatment. In the hospital, they can give you a heparin drip. In my case, that's exactly what happened. I was on a heparin drip for 6 days in the hospital. This typically would not be done at home unless someone's under medical supervision. The other treatments would be things like Coumadin, Lovenox. These are different types of blood thinners. Coumadin is something that's given oral. Lovenox is given through injection. I've taken both of these. Coumadin has certain challenges. One of the big challenges is you have to make sure you're taking the appropriate dose of Coumadin, that you're not pushing yourself into a state where your blood does not really clot fast enough, and that can be dangerous in terms of bleeding out. So what they measure is something called your PT, your pre-thrombin time. Your prothrombin time, and they look to see essentially, I'm oversimplifying, how quickly your blood will clot. That has to be assessed every so often, especially if you're going to change the dose of Coumadin. So, for example, someone might start on Coumadin and have to have their blood drawn every single day to look at their INR and their PT. And then if it looks like it's stabilized, if you're ever going to change the dose, it requires another round of testing to make sure that you're on the appropriate dose of Coumadin. You really want to hit the sweet spot to make sure the blood is clotting in a timely fashion. Lovenox is given through injection. One of the challenges with Coumadin is it's teratogenic, meaning it can cause birth defects. You cannot give Coumadin to a pregnant or nursing mother. So when I was following my blood clot when I was pregnant with my daughter, I went on Lovenox for the entire length of the pregnancy. Lovenox was easy in that you didn't have to have your PT or your INR done all the time, but it is a subcutaneous injection, so you have to be comfortable with doing that. There are other drugs out there that kind of prevent platelet aggregation that are met with some success as well to treat clots. Okay. The last thing we want to talk about is blood typing. Maddie wants to be in the video, but she's afraid to step into the camera.
No, I'm not coming in the video.
Okay, so
I see your son.
why is blood typing important? Okay, so in humans, there are 4 blood types. A, B, AB, and O. Okay? What does this all mean? On the surface of your red blood cells, you have little protein markers. If you have A, it's blood type A. If you have B, whoops, it's blood type B. If you have both, it's blood type AB, and if you have neither of these markers, you're O. Okay? When someone has blood type A, what type of blood can they get? Okay, so you have two options. You can receive blood type A or O. If you're B, you can receive B or O. If you're AB, you're good. You can have everybody. AB is classified as a universal recipient. They can have any type of blood without a negative reaction, which I'll explain what that would be in a minute. Okay, O, you can only have O, unfortunately. This is the universal donor. So they love you at the blood bank if you're O, and they call you up all the time and say, please come donate blood, because they want your blood. In an emergency situation, you would give somebody blood type O. Because this is the recessive, from a genetic standpoint, blood type, it won't cause a negative transfusion reaction with any of the other types of blood. Okay? What happens if your blood type is A and I give you B? Okay. The long and the short of it is your immune system will mount a very aggressive reaction whereby you have antibodies to the wrong type of blood that will go after your blood cells and cause them to lyse. So it's extremely dangerous. It's called a transfusion reaction and will cause, if not remedied quickly, can be fatal. Where does your blood type come from? It's genetic. So you inherit genes for proteins on the surface of your red blood cells. Where did you get these genes from? Your mom and your dad. Okay? So this is genetic. You got half of your genetic material from your mother and half from your biological father. And in the genes that you received, there were genes for different blood types. So that's going to code for those proteins that are on the surface of all of your red blood cells. And so this is genetic, okay? The other piece to blood type is you're either positive or you're negative. Yeah, and if you tell me your blood type and your mom, I can tell who your daddy is. Okay. Positive and negative, what does that mean? Okay, that's a different protein on the surface of red blood cells. That's called the Rh factor. So if you're Rh positive, it means you have the protein for the Rh factor. Rh negative, obviously, you do not. What does the Rh stand for? This is very interesting. This Rh stands for rhesus, because this protein factor was first identified in the rhesus monkey. So for example, if someone is A positive, it means they are blood type A and they are positive for the Rh factor. If you are A negative, that means you are still blood type A, but you are negative for the Rh factor. In the United States, most people are positive. And that's going to wrap it up for blood. Thank you for your time, everyone.